I'm so bored, Julie whispered while walking around a small pond on the edge of her parents' estate. This place, this country, it was so mind-numbingly boring. Why had her father brought her here? What reason could there even be? Back in their home country, she had friends, teachers she loved, and even one or two servant girls she had thought of as almost her sisters. But here, in this rainy, dreary place, nothing. All she had were 3 teachers, 1 old maid, and this estate that seemed so much smaller, since it was surrounded by first a giant wall, and second, behind that, thick and unkempt woods. There were no kids her age for miles, no markets, no street performers, nothing. It was boring her to death. Well, at least to tears. Julie harumphed and jumped up, only to land in the mud next to the tiny pond, splashing muck and dirt all over her white shoes and socks. If Grandma was here, she would have been mad. But she wasn't. Wouldn't be for another week. Julie growled and started to run through the mud, sliding every few steps while more and more of the wet dirt landed on her dress. The old maid would be too proper to say anything about that anyway. Even though some people might think of her new life as one with more freedom, Julie couldn't see it that way at all. Yeah, the staff here didn't engage with her much. No one was running after her, telling her to go back inside or warning her that she might catch a cold or stuff like that. The people here didn't talk back, because to her, they didn't really care. As long as they got paid on time by her father, they couldn't give a single damn about what happened to her. That was all she was to them. A job. Julie felt a tear welling up in her eye and shook her head defiantly while her feet finally stopped their frantic pacing. She wanted to go home, but her father had different ideas. He seemed set on this new adventure, as he had called it. And as always, if he decided to do something, the rest of the family had to follow. A sob was building in her throat, and she kicked out at the mud, watching it splatter the surface of the small pond in front of her. That's so dumb! Why couldn't they have stayed back in their old country? Her life was so unfair. Julie watched the rippling surface and stopped her tantrum in an instant. She could see the clouds reflected in the pond getting distorted, and caught a glimpse of something that really shouldn't be there. Short, blonde hair, and a forehead that looked completely different from hers. It was like a mirror reflection, only not. She watched in amazement as the ripple slowly subsided and the picture cleared up a bit. Julie could see the 3 trees on the other side of the pond on the surface of the water, but what she couldn't see was the boy standing there between 2 trunks, smiling back at her out of the reflection. He seemed to be about the same age as her, but Julie still got a chill every time her eyes wandered from the pond's surface up to the real trees where no one was standing. Slowly, she raised her hand, unsure if she should smile at all, while a cold chill seemed to fill the area. The boy beamed and started waving. He was jumping up and down, grinning from ear to ear. Even though her heart was now racing, it wasn't exactly from joy. Julie felt this tingling feeling in the nape of her neck as her hair started to rise. This was wrong, some part of her told her. Somehow, it felt bad. But the boy was still grinning and jumping up and down, like a lost child that had finally found a familiar face or friend. "Who are you?" Julie whispered, and forced herself to keep standing, even though her body seemed ready to turn and run. The boy's jumping stopped, as did his grinning. There was a sad expression on his face now as he started looking from side to side. What was he doing? Julie watched in anguish as the boy's movements became more and more hectic. He was shaking his head, looking around for something. At least he didn't make a move toward her, Julie thought, but felt the tension in the air worsening. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the boy suddenly stopped his hectic movements, jumped forward and plunged a hand into the water. Julie watched him closely as he worked around in there, periodically looking up and giving her a pained smile. He was drenching the white shirt he was wearing, and the dark blue pants were already completely covered in mud. She thought about saying something again, telling him to stop, but Julie's voice didn't leave her throat. The boy suddenly jumped up and back, holding an object in his muddy hand while ripples formed on the surface of the water from the droplets he was spraying around. Julie watched as he started shaking himself even more while he raised his hand and the object, then turned around and ran toward the trees. She couldn't see what the boy was holding, but he was clearly working on something. His shoulders were moving up and down and side to side, while one hand held onto the trunk of the leftmost tree. This was so strange. Julie had never seen something like that, had never even heard of anything remotely comparable to this, outside of the bedtime stories her grandma used to tell her. Only, part of her was completely fascinated by what she was watching. This boy in the surface reflection seemed eager. Maybe he was lonely, just like her. That could be possible. The strange way he had reacted to her voice, coupled with the stress she had seen him go through as he had tried to get something out of the pond, made that the most likely explanation. Julie was still staring at the figure working in front of the tree until the boy's shoulders finally stopped moving and he turned around with a wide grin on his face. She could see the object in his hand now as well, a rock with a sharp edge. He was grinning from ear to ear and waving at her, showing her to come closer and look at the tree. Julie already wanted to shake her head. It was impossible to see whatever he had done from this distance, but at the boy's insistence, she finally relented and got onto her knees to take a bit of a closer look. Just bending down didn't help much, and the smile on the boy's face disappeared as he saw her doing it. He was waving her closer still, but as her face got lower and the distance between the tip of her nose and the surface of the water diminished, some part of her stopped her. Alarm bells were ringing in her mind. She could hear her grandma's voice in her thoughts, yelling at her to stop, that this was dangerous, and that she was, right now, very close to doing something she wouldn't be able to return from. Julie looked at the boy in the reflection and could see that he wasn't waving anymore, but pointing off to the side. She pushed herself up to see him more clearly and to get away from the water and finally understood what he meant. He wanted her to come around the pond, to look at the trees. Julie shook her head, but still started moving. Her heart was racing. This wasn't what she had expected to happen. All she had wanted to do was let out her anger, then go back inside and spend the rest of the evening either reading a book or lounging about in her bedroom. But here she was, walking around the pond, to look at the 3 boring trees. Julie lost sight of the boy as she started going. The pond wasn't very big. It would hardly be enough to home a few small fish species, the old maid had told her once, and it was absolutely far too dirty and cold to take a swim in it. Still, even though in her mind she was already calling herself an idiot for following the strange reflection boy's orders, something inside her kept pushing her on. It was an adventure. Whatever he wanted to show her, this whole situation had at least banished this dreadful boredom she had experienced. Julie could see the reflection out of the corner of her eye and could see a now familiar blonde head of hair appearing every few moments. He was walking around with her, only in the other direction. What was he planning now? Or did he do that so that she could see him? As she stopped and looked more closely, Julie saw that he was still staring back at her, pointed in the direction of the trees, while smiling as brightly as before. She shook her head, then nodded, and continued walking at a brisker pace. Something was wrong here. The voice of her grandma still mourned her, but her curiosity drove her on. The boy had done something to the trees, and Julie was now determined to find out what. She ran the last few steps and ignored the mud spraying up around her as she reached her target with a racing heart. A chill seemed to cool the air around her as she looked at the bark of the middle tree. She had seen it before, studied the 3 trunks closely to find a way to climb up on them, but had abandoned those thoughts yesterday when she had realized that all 3 of them were completely smooth. Well, not any longer. She could see it clearly in the bark, a word carved roughly into the tree. Tobias. She was 100% certain that that word hadn't been there yesterday, or even 10 minutes ago. Without another second's hesitation, she whirled around and looked at the reflective surface of the pond, seeing the blonde-haired boy now standing exactly where she had been, not even 2 minutes ago. He was smiling and pointing at himself. "Tobias?" she asked, and he laughed merrily, even though she couldn't hear a single sound coming from him. "Can I call you Toby?" "I'm Julie, by the way." The boy stopped for a moment, then jumped up into the air in a gesture of pure, unadulterated joy. He was nodding his head so hard that Julie feared he might stumble and fall into the pond. Despite that, she couldn't help but smile. She had thought he would have done something more nefarious, maybe carved some evil sign into the tree, but all he had wanted to do was tell her his name. He was lonely, just like her. "Wanna play a game, Toby?" Julie asked, and suddenly the boy stopped jumping around and his eyes got wide. He nodded as quickly as humanly possible while giving her 2 thumbs up. Julie chuckled, and her bright laughter filled the garden of this big estate. Only, what kind of game could one play with such a being? She could hear him, but he could definitely hear her. She could only see him through the pond, but could he see her all the time? They could hardly play catch or hide and seek, right? "What should we play?" Julie wondered aloud and could see the blonde-haired boy stop his jumping up and down as well. He seemed as perplexed as she was, which made her wonder if he ever had found anyone who had seen him at all before she came along. She was racking her brain until finally a single possibility popped into her head. "You can mark stuff with that stone, right?" The boy nodded with an exaggerated motion of his head. How about I look away? You leave a marking round here and then I'll go find it? His smile beamed and he started jumping up and down again. We need some ground rules, though. No marking anything I can't get to. And you have to help me if I'm stuck. At least telling me if I'm getting closer or going further away from the thing you've marked. The boy nodded while jumping and smiling, and Julie felt herself grinning as well. She had found someone to play with in this dreadful place after all. I'll sit here and only stare at the spot you're standing in right now. Once you're finished, you can come and show me. That okay? The boy was still nodding, still jumping around as Julie sat down and then watched him disappear to the side. She couldn't see him, and if she followed him with her eyes, he might actually catch her. Well, it wouldn't be fun if she cheated, now would it? So she closed her eyes for a few moments and tried listening to the noises surrounding the area. Neath the sound of the low breeze touching the dead-looking trees and softly stroking the grass, she thought she could hear something. The sound of someone moving, quickly. It was too far away to be sure. Well, at least it sounded that way, but she thought she could hear it from her left. How far could this boy even go? She wondered. There seemed to be rules she didn't know about. Could he enter the main building and carve something into the tapestry? Or to the servants' house and cut up one of their curtains? Somehow, Julie shivered at the thought. She continued listening and slowly but surely found that she could hear it more clearly. The steps of the boy running around the lawn. He probably was too giddy to decide what to mark first. Julie smiled again, then suddenly heard the steps stopping and the sound of something hard scraping against wood. Probably the gazebo, the one that was standing empty, off to the side, pretty much completely abandoned by the looks of it. She felt her cheeks flushing, since she already knew where he was putting down the mark, but promised herself to not make it too obvious from the start. The last thing she wanted to do was to hurt his feelings. This boy seemed like he really, really needed a friend. Julie stopped listening so intently and started humming a tune while she waited for the blonde hair to appear in the reflection of the pond again. It did take him a few minutes, far longer than she had thought it would, until he finally appeared again, grinning from ear to ear while waving at her. Is it done? Julie asked, and the boy jumped up and down. Maybe he had changed places after she had stopped listening. That could be a reason for why it had taken him that long. Still, it wouldn't change much for her. Julie stood up and started walking in the opposite direction of where the boy had disappeared. She could see his bright smile every time she turned and looked back toward the pond. He followed her around, laughing all the while, and even though she couldn't see it, Julie almost felt the joy he was experiencing right now. A child, completely abandoned in a place like this. How long had he been here? If he didn't age, it could be centuries, completely alone. What would that do to someone? Julie was so sunken in her thoughts that she would have missed the boy jumping up and giving her a thumbs up as she finally got close to the gazebo. She stopped and smiled back, then turned around once in fake confusion. Where could it be? She asked out loud and watched the boy almost bowling over while giggling. His joy truly was contagious. She couldn't help but smile as well. Julie stepped in the wrong direction on purpose and saw him looking shocked for a moment, then yelled, "Ha! Got you!" and raced toward the gazebo. It wasn't hard finding the freshly carved mark in the old and weathered wood of the strut, but as she came closer, Julie almost froze. There, in the dark wood, she finally saw what the boy had left her. A heart. Small and rough, but its meaning still reached her without a single word. A tear was building in her eye as she turned and ran back toward the pond. The boy was still standing in the same place on the other side. She could see through the reflection. But now he wasn't smiling anymore. He looked nervous. "Toby! That was so lovely!" Julie shouted, now feeling the tear running down her cheek. The boy was staring down for a moment longer, then finally lifted his head to look back at her. He had tears in his eyes as well, and as he saw her, the smile returned to his face. Again, jumping up and down, racing along the pond back and forth, he let her know that he was happy. And Julie felt it as well. "Another round?" she asked, and the boy stopped in his tracks before nodding as excessively as possible with his small frame. They spent the whole afternoon like that. Time and time again, Julie waited until the boy disappeared, then reappeared, and went on to find his messages. Sometimes she got hearts, other times words. Friend, happy, joy, together, and even her name. Julie howled in delight with every new discovery, and the boy seemed completely overjoyed by her reaction. Instead of slowing down a bit, he got faster, was jumping higher and showing even more glee after each round they played. It only stopped once the sun was setting, the light was getting dim, and Julie had to rely on her new friend to really point her to the place where he had left the next message. It was a word. Just one, again. But this one felt different. Forever. Julie felt a chill, but still made sure to show enough appreciation for his hard work. Something about it was just off. She nodded and waved and told Tobias that she had to go inside since the old maid would be looking for her soon anyway. Even in the low light, Julie could see the downtrodden expression on the child's face. "We can play again tomorrow," she promised, and felt the boy looking at her as well. He still wasn't smiling. Of that much she was sure. But he had to understand, right? It wasn't like she was free to stay out here and only chose not to do so. She had responsibilities. The loud voice of the head maid cut through the night at exactly that moment, shouting Julie's full name, and she felt a new chill in the air as the boy simply continued looking at her. "Believe me, I wish I could stay here with you, but it's not possible. My family would never allow me. And besides, I need some sleep. Please, I'll see you tomorrow, Toby, and we can play all day long. Promise." The boy shifted and turned, but she thought she could see a slight smile on his lips before he waved goodbye listlessly and seemingly walked off. Where would he go while she wasn't here? Would he have to stay close to the pond? What did his world really look like? The place where he spent his time? Julie heard the maid calling out her name again and started to run toward the main building. Something about Toby now rubbed her the wrong way. His reaction when she had said goodbye had been so strange. That, paired with the last message, it just left a sour taste in her mouth. Well, the food didn't help much. Julie just couldn't grow accustomed to the spices here, or the lack of, to be exact. She forced herself to eat, smiled pleasantly all the while, then excused herself and went to her room at the first chance she got. It wasn't like Mum had joined supper, or anyone else important for that matter. If she was honest, she didn't care about etiquette rules right now. What she really wanted to know was if she could see something from her window, up on the 3rd floor overlooking the garden. Julie got ready for bed far too early and raced up into her room, now feeling this ominous tension returning to the air. The mansion was big, yeah, but it didn't feel at all like the one they had left in the old country. It felt abandoned here, deserted. There were no voices in the air, no smells wafting through the hallways. No one was laughing or singing or even talking around her. All Julie could hear was her own racing heartbeat as she jumped up the stairs that led to the 3rd floor. She really didn't like this place, she thought, and disappeared into the big room her mum had let her choose for herself and closed the door behind her. Now, she didn't just feel lost, but also somehow scared. The moon had long since risen, and Julie didn't dare turn on any light as she snuck through the room and toward the window. Outside, night had already set in. She could see the walls surrounding the garden, the woods behind them, and a small road snaking its way through the area before it ended at the gate. Grandma would be coming along this path, Julie told herself, and finally managed a weak smile. Just a few more days. Grandma would know what to do. She always had. Julie heard the wind brushing past her window and stared down at the garden. The gazebo looked even worse from up here, but what disturbed her the most was the fact that she could see the moon inside the pond. It reminded her of an eye, big and unblinking. This was a scene out of a nightmare, Julie thought, and began to shiver. The temperature inside her room seemed to drop, and the young girl ran for her bed and hid beneath the blanket. She felt tired, vulnerable, and exhausted. Everything was so difficult here, in this new country. And even the things that were fun, like playing today, now felt somehow dangerous and sinister at the same time. I want to go home, she whispered. Or at least have Grandma by her side. This was too much. Julie slipped into a restless sleep, overwhelmed by everything. But even in her dreams, she couldn't find any rest. She could see the pond and the blonde-haired boy sitting by its shore in the mud. Only this time, Julie felt that she had to be quiet. He was staring into the reflection, completely oblivious to her presence, and every instinct in her screamed at her to keep it that way. If he looked up and saw her, something bad would happen. The voice that told her sounded like Grandma. She knew about stuff like that very well. Julie clasped a hand in front of her mouth to keep herself from breathing, but a sudden movement made the boy freeze. His head started turning toward her ever so slowly, and with a scream, Julie shot up in bed while she kicked the blanket off her feet. Something cold and rough had touched her cheek. She could feel it still. Julie jumped out of bed and looked around the room. No other person was here with her, but that didn't mean she was alone. She could see them. Markings all around her. Along the walls, the furniture, and even the bed. Words she had seen before, down in the garden. Friend. Forever. And worst of all, come. Toby? she whispered, but got no answer. Something hard and sharp touched her elbow, and Julie jumped again. The stone he had used to carve this. He could touch her with it as well. Julie could see something appearing along the bedpost. A cut. It was forming slowly but steadily, then stopped before a word in the frame. Come. The message was clear, and as much as Julie looked around, she already knew she wouldn't be able to do anything but follow. If only Grandma was here. She would know. A sharp pain shot through her back as the edge of the stone touched her and cut into the shirt she was wearing. He was angry. Toby wanted her to move. Julie could feel tears welling up in her eyes, but she started walking. You don't have to do this, she whispered, but only felt another slight pain as the invisible thing touched her back once again. The house felt empty and cold as she slowly descended the stairs. There were markings everywhere. Deep cuts in the tapestry and the banisters, all along the way from her room down to the glass door that led out into the garden. Julie froze as she touched the cold handle. Her body was shaking. If she opened the door, there would be no turning back. The sharp edge scraped her shoulder, and Julie winced in pain. Would he kill her if she didn't open the door? She could hardly imagine the blonde-haired boy looking angry, much less doing something like that, but the sight from her dream came back, and Julie's hand pressed down on the handle. Cold air blew in from the opening crack of the door, yet it felt hardly colder than the one that seemed to surround her since she had woken up. Should she scream for help? No, it would only make him angrier. What could she do to escape this spirit? Not much, at least not on her own. Maybe he'd only want to play with her again. She would do so, and once the sun rose, she would get into a carriage and drive off. The sharp edge cut her cheek, and Julie yelped as she jumped forward and onto the muddy grass of the lawn. He was losing patience, she realized, as her fingers brushed the cut in her skin and felt a warm drop of blood running down toward her neck. It was still clear where the boy wanted her to go. The 3 trees where he had left his name the first time. Julie quickened her steps, yet felt the cold and sharp stone at her sides now almost constantly. Please, someone help me, she howled in her mind, while tears were streaming down her face, stinging in the cut on her cheek. Julie reached the trees, and for the first time the stones seemed to leave her, as the boy gave her a chance to rest. She could feel vibrations in the wood as the spirit worked on something else and left her for a few seconds. Run! A part of her mind howled. Don't, another replied. The boy would catch up to her and hurt her far worse if she started running. He was still thinking of her as a friend, after all. At least, that was what Julie hoped. Something cold and hard touched her cheek, but this time, he didn't cut her. No, he wanted her attention. Julie turned her head and took another step until she could see the front of the tree again. There, beneath the name he had left a few hours ago, were now 4 more words. Come to me. And beneath that, forever, with an arrow pointing to the pond. Julie couldn't move. Her body stood there, frozen, even as the sharp stone cut her again. No, she whispered, and felt more stinging pain as something cut through her pajama top and into her shoulder. She was shaking her head and felt the skin on her arm opening up. "Please don't make me," Julie begged. But the cuts only got deeper and angrier and were coming quicker. She yelped in pain and felt blood drench her clothing. "Toby, please." Something hard and cold hit her forehead, making her stumble and fall into the mud. Julie cried openly as she felt the sharp stone against her skin again. All she could feel was pain and fear, and her body started moving away from the trees. She dragged her shaking feet along the mud toward the pond. The stone left her alone as long as she moved where he wanted her to go. All Julie could think about was escaping the pain. She was sobbing and crying, but still, no one in the whole mansion was answering her. Her hand touched cold water, and her body froze again. Julie looked down at the surface, and now she could see him. Even in the darkness, she recognized the head of hair. The face was completely twisted into a mask of anger and pain. She could even see the stone in his hand raised above her head. "Please," Julie begged, but it only made the expression on the boy's face more twisted. She saw him swing down his hand with the stone, felt the sharp pain flaring up in her hip as her body jerked forward involuntarily. The ice-cold water of the pond was reaching up to her elbows already. She even felt her pajamas getting drenched and the countless wounds in her skin burning in the liquid. "I can't," Julie screamed, but only felt another jolt of pain as the stone hit her again. In the ripples, she could see his face, full of anger and greed. She was crying and howling, but at every hit, her body moved forward. Julie had to crane her neck to keep her mouth over the surface already. Her racing heartbeat filled her ears, together with her own screams and shouts and the splashing of water. But there was another noise. Hooves, Julie thought, and suddenly felt the stone in the boy's hand pressing against the back of her head. He pushed her down with far more strength than she could have imagined, deeper and deeper into the cold darkness of the pond. Julie could hear herself still screaming as bubbles popped around her ears. Would she wake up in the same world as the boy? Be forced to live there with him forever? She tried struggling, but no matter where she reached, she couldn't even grasp the thing holding her head underwater. Light flashed in front of her eyes. She could taste blood in her mouth, mixing itself with dirty pond water. The beating of her heart sounded like hooves, and her shaking turned into the vibrations of a carriage racing along toward her. Julie screamed and felt the air from her lungs shooting past her face as bubbles. Somewhere in the darkness, a voice answered her shout. She could feel cold water flooding her lungs as strong hands grabbed her by the shoulder and pulled at her. Julie coughed and cried as she was lifted up into a scene of complete chaos. The light was shining close by, from lamps, and she saw her grandma standing there in the pond water, waving around something that looked like a rosary, screaming her lungs out. The man who held her carried her away from her granny, who was hissing and screaming. One last time, Julie managed to open her eyes and could see the whole scene. Just an arm's length away from her grandma, the boy was standing knee-deep in the pond's water. His face was completely inhuman now. He was hissing and screaming as he lifted the broken-apart rock high above his head. She wanted to shout at her grandma and tell her to be careful, but the man who held her put a hand over her mouth as he raced with her toward the mansion. Julie woke up to sunshine outside, in a white room, somewhere she had never been before. Her whole body was aching, burning, and hurting from the countless cuts and bruises. But as soon as she tried to move, an old, warm hand touched her softly and pressed her back down. Her grandma was sitting there beside her bed, her head bandaged as well. There was a sadness in her eyes Julie had never seen before. I had a dream about you, getting pulled in there. I am sorry I was late, child. The old woman whispered, and even though Julie wanted to reply, her voice couldn't leave her throat. Don't worry. I made them drain the pond and crush the bones at its bottom. He will never get to you again. The old woman continued, and the hand started to slowly stroke her cheek. The doctor has given you something that will help you sleep. Rest now, honey, and think of it all as nothing but a bad dream. Julie again tried to struggle against the hand, but she could feel the medication pulling her consciousness back down. She wanted to warn her, tell her, but her voice didn't come out. He was standing there, behind her, in the corner of the room, watching, waiting, biding his time. Julie could see him, grinning, but instead of a scream, all that left her mouth was a groan, as she sunk back into the soft pillow and lost consciousness again.